Hey there guys, this is George, your weekend traveler here at EPG Network. And of course we have something special. We have a preview of the instruments of war here at the Gettysburg Heritage Center. So we're gonna go check this out. Come join me.
This is the instrument that first was used to produce chromatic notes in the early part of the 1800s. This one dates from about 1820 or 1830. But they found that you could get chromatic notes, but then by around 1830, 1840, somebody invented the valve system, and that became obsolete. Biography, memoirs, he talks about taps in his book, and this was a special publication. There were only 400 copies ever printed of the original thing, and I own 4 of them. Wow. So happy to lend one here. Each were numbered inside. This is the regulation bugle, infantry bugle. Of course, there were manuals. Oliver Wilcox Norton, the bugler who first sounded taps, wrote about his experiences in the latter part of the 19th century. He wrote letters home to his sister, and she kept all the letters, about 150 letters. And then when he left the army in the latter part of the 19th century, he made $1 million. He was a very successful businessman. He had all the letters transcribed by his secretary into a book, which is over there. And that's the original book of all the letters, which was then used for the publication of the book Army Letters. Unfortunately, they threw out all the letters because after they wrote it into the book, they said, "What do we need these for?" And then we have an infantry manual, and then little figures of what the bands look like: Union band and Confederate band. On this side, we have a cornet, E-flat cornet. It's called a sax horn, and those instruments were set up 3 ways. You could play them with the front bell with the side action here, or you could play it front with the top. They had the valves or the set up this way. They also had it that would go over the shoulder, as you see here, and also straight up. So they were all different types. In the back here, and we're going to get, as we go along, this is just the preview, we're going to get better lighting so that these are very, very clear.
Yes.
In the back here is a musician's sword. Musicians were actually issued swords, which were smaller than the regular NCO swords because they were for kids. But
they got the shortcut.
Nobody liked them, so they wound up using them to pitch tents and shish kebab, things like that. But this is a good example of the over-the-shoulder E-flat horn. And this is an original band book from 1863, belonged to some civilian band. So you can see back then they wrote everything out by hand. Now, because they had printers and stuff, but most band books were all handwritten. Of course, we have some examples of fifes here. The big stick there is called a staff. People think it's called a mace or a baton, but back then it's referred to as a staff, which the drum major used to signal the band to go, to start, stop, and all that stuff. We have also, this is a reproduction of a pouch. The musicians had to carry their music somehow, so we found a couple original samples of what these pouches look like. So we actually had some made. That one, so it gives you an idea of musicians carrying their music, and then some samples of the music. This hat down here belongs to a civilian band, and it's actually a very hard hat. It's an original. It was made in the 1860s. It says RLCB on the front here. The CB stands for Cornet Band. RL, who knows? Maybe some town.
Yeah,
What town is RL? We thought hopefully it was Rhode Island, but it's L.
Yeah.
So anyway, we will have more posters that depict different musicians, different bands, and they'll be set up. We haven't decided yet where to put them. We'll probably put them against this wall over here. And behind you, we have the two uniforms. The Union uniform here is, and these are reproductions because we can't really put out originals. The Union musicians wore the regulation uniform, blue uniform, except they had an added thing of what was called a bird cage. And this was put on the uniform to identify them as musicians. This tradition, you'll see, goes down to band uniforms today. If you ever see band uniforms with that, that's where this tradition comes from. The reason is that it would make it easier for commanders to find their musicians in the heat of battle. Unfortunately, or fortunately, musicians hated that because they figure if the commander could see you, Johnny Reb over there can also see you, and you're the guy that's giving the signals. And so outside, besides that was the regular uniform. The uniform, the gray uniform over here, is a reproduction of the uniform worn by the 26th North Carolina Regimental Band. This is a band from Salem, North Carolina. They were a band of Moravian musicians. They were the town band of Salem, North Carolina. They signed up with the 26th North Carolina in April 1862. Served with them during the entire war. They were here at Gettysburg during the 3 days. The first day, the 26th North Carolina Regiment fought up near where the area where the seminary is, and they were really hurt, really beat up badly. They lost almost half their troops that first day. The second day, they were in rest and recuperation. The band members were helping in the hospital tend to the wounds of their comrades. When they got the word that the general wanted the band to go out onto the field and play, and they sent the word back saying, no, we're taking care of our guys, this is important. And the general said, you need to get onto the field. So they hooked up with the 11th North Carolina Band, and they actually went out on the field during the battle, the second day, and they were playing polkas and waltzes and marches to help inspire the men. There was an observer from the United Kingdom, Lieutenant Colonel Fremantle, and he was with Lee's army. He actually writes about it, saying that how curious it was that in the midst of all the bombs going off, there was a Confederate band playing polkas and waltzes. And also, the northern papers picked it up too. Probably one of the very few times in history where a regimental band played under fire. The band sticks with the 23rd, they stick with the 26th North Carolina for the rest of the war. After they make it back to Virginia, the band leader, his name is Sam Mickey, he's actually summoned to the headquarters of General Lee. And he goes there, he's really worried because he's thinking, oh my goodness, they're going to tell us to put our instruments away and take up the musket because they were so short of men. Well, it turns out General Lee said, no, I just wanted to compliment you for what you do. And he said, I don't think we can have an army without music. That's where that quote comes. He's talking to that band. They serve for the rest of the war. They are down in Petersburg and the breastworks. When the Union Army pushes through, they with the rest of the army, they push towards Appomattox. They get separated from their unit, the band. So they're like 10 guys off on their own. They stop by a house and they knock on the door and they ask the woman who answers if she would feed them, and she does. And in return, they play Lorena for her. And it's the last time they ever play as a band because the next day they're captured by Union forces and sent to a prisoner of war camp in Point Lookout, Maryland, where they are to spend the next 2.5 months before going back home to Salem and then reforming as the town band and resuming their regular jobs as tinsmiths, cobblers, bookbinders, and the rest. And there are photos of this band that go on into the latter part of the 19th century. Sam Mickey, the leader, comes back here in 1913 to be part of the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. The uniform itself is gray, like all uniforms. It's made of what's called cadet wool, which is a blend of wool and cotton. Okay, and these uniforms for the band were a little different in that it was a whole frock. You'll notice that most Confederates, they wear the short jackets. Well, this band wore the long frock. The other thing about it is that the dye for the uniform was gray, but it was of a vegetable dye. So when you wear it out in the sun, and we've done this is really something. You wear it out in the sun long enough, guess what?
Butternut gray.
What times it turns what?
Butternut gray.
Turns butternut. That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. It turns that brownish color, that butternut that everybody talks about.
Yeah.
So that's where that comes from. But it's nice to see that reproduction. We weren't sure. The description was of brass buttons, and there were a couple different types of buttons for North Carolina. There was the North Carolina seal, there was the Starburst seal, and then there was the NC States, just NC. So we decided to go with the state seal. Figure North Carolina was very
Independent.
independent. In fact, they didn't want, when it got towards the end of the war, they were hoarding all their uniforms for use by their own guys.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. So the buttons is pretty evident of that. So anyway, any questions on that? Did I explain it very well? Okay.
Good.
Pass out the test, will you? Well, thank you. We are going to, like I said, there'll be more bits and pieces added to this as we go along.
How long does this run, Gary?
For at least a year or two, I think.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's just not going to be 6 months, for a while.
And what were the casualty rates with these guys? I mean,
Casualties were high actually among field musicians who actually went out and had to play, those up front. The drummers and fifers. Brass bandsmen, there weren't that many casualties. Some bands were captured. The Zouave band, of Pennsylvania, they were actually captured at one point in time, but they were released. I guess they felt they were, the Confederates felt they were not so dangerous.
were they armed when? I mean, that sounds like a silly question.
Musicians were non-combatants.
Okay.
So, but it varied because some musicians, like Oliver Wilcox Norton, the bugler, he also carried a weapon and he fought alongside his comrades when needed. But for the most part, musicians were supposed to be non-combatants. They worked very close to their commanding officer, and because of that, if you were like a principal musician working very close to your commander, you got like good rations. You didn't have to carry your luggage. You could have it carried for you in the wagon and stuff. You got some, and you also got a horse too. So,
Big bus.
good.
And when are you moving to Gettysburg to be a permanent resident?
I hope so. I'm telling you.
You recruited.
I am.
Yeah.
I've been recruited ever since I knew him.
So
Where do you live?
I live in Baltimore.
Oh, my.
So
Okay.
the one nice thing is with the photos that we have up, there's connections to a lot of these photos to Gettysburg. Like for example, Oliver Wilcox Norton, the first bugler, he was here. He was at Little Round Top with Strong Vincent, actually, and he was the guidon bearer and bugler for Strong Vincent.
Yeah.
He and Strong Vincent are the ones that actually go up on Little Round Top at the beginning and figure out, like, oh my goodness, we really need to get our troops up here real fast. Because they're up there and exposed, and he's carrying this big red brigade flag, they're starting. The Confederates start shooting at them. So Strong Vincent jumps off the horse, tells Norton, take the horses off, to safety, and the troops come up here. Because Strong Vincent jumps off the horse so quickly, he forgets his sword. The sword is on the horse. So for the entire battle, he's conducting using a riding crop, which was a gift from his wife. Unfortunately, he's mortally wounded, passes away. He is beloved by his troops. Oliver Wilcox Norton and him were very close, and he writes about the loss of his friend. I just can only imagine how it must have been to have Strong Vincent on his deathbed and have all the people from his brigade come by to say goodbye.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So, but anyway, Norton goes, like I said, actually Norton's a great story because after Gettysburg, he applies to become an officer. He goes to Washington, and takes all the tests and stuff, and then gets granted gets commissioned as an officer. And he wanted specifically to be an officer in a black unit.
Wow.
And he becomes an officer with the 8th United States Colored Troops, which he serves for the rest of the war. Something he wanted to do. He becomes a quartermaster officer in that regiment. After the war, he moves to New York, meets his wife, he works as a clerk. Then he hooks up with his brother, and both of them go into the canning business. They revolutionize canning. They come up with a new process of making cans, revolutionize the whole thing, buy up companies and form it into what's called the American Can Corporation. He makes $1 gazillion, loses his eyesight. The last 15 years, he's totally blind. But he still remains friends with the Strong Vincent family. His wife, Libby, Elizabeth, stays friends with them. Because of that family association, he finds out about a place in New York called Lake Chautauqua, which is near Erie, and it's a very a beautiful lake where you go there for
Classes and
classes.
it's like a brain trust area.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so he goes there, builds a house there, builds a special ramp down to the lake for his invalid daughter. He had a young daughter named Ruth who had a terrible accident at age 4 or 5, and she becomes an invalid for the rest of her life. But she writes poetry that's incredible. So he builds this ramp so she can get onto a little boat and sail on the lake. It's just so amazing. He passes away in 1920. I believe he was cremated. His ashes were scattered there at the lake because we can't find any records of where he's buried. So I'm assuming that's what happened. In 1929, his widow donates money at Lake Chautauqua to build a concert hall at Chautauqua. It still stands today. It's the Norton Concert Hall. If you ever go there, it's beautiful, beautiful hall. They perform operas in English. Supposedly there was a stipulation made about that. Nobody's not quite sure. But his son, Ralph Norton, also becomes a very famous businessman, also very much into the arts, but he's into like paintings. After he retires, he and his wife moved down to West Palm Beach, Florida, where they open up a big art museum. You go down there, it's the Norton Gallery. It's a beautiful place. And supposedly in the late 50s, when he died, when Ralph died, he gave the bugle that was used at Gettysburg to Norton. The bugle used by Norton gives it to Berkeley Plantation. So amazing. It's just an incredible story. He comes back actually in September of 1889 for the dedication of the 83rd Pennsylvania Monument. It's down the hill from a little round top. It's Strong Vincent, although if you look, it doesn't say Strong Vincent. It doesn't say that, because there was a prohibition about having names of colonels, regiment. But everybody knows it's Strong Vincent. So he comes there. He's actually the main speaker for the event, and he talks about Strong Vincent, talks about the battle, and he brings his bugle. And after he finishes, he plays the old regimental bugle call. There was a regimental bugle call that Butterfield came up with. Regimental bugle calls are very short calls that are used to let the regiment know that the next bugle call that follows is for them. Sorry. They called it the Dan Butterfield call because they say, Dan, Butterfield, okay? And Butterfield even talks about it in his later life. He says, when things got trying, the troops would say, Dan Butterfield. But everybody knew that call, that regiment. Butterfield actually said that if he was like at a train station and would recognize somebody, he would whistle that call softly, and then there would be this recognition, and it's, oh, comrade, so good to see you. So Norton actually brings his bugle, plays that call on Little Round Top, and all the veterans come rushing up the hill, crying about, oh, play that call again. So, wow. It's a great thing. So anyway, so he was here, Butterfield was here, although Butterfield was the chief of staff to General Meade at Gettysburg. And hopefully we're going to find some more artifacts that are Gettysburg centric.
This is great.
This is a cool exhibit on the history of music, especially brass bands. It's a pretty cool exhibit. This is just a preview called The Instruments of War. Now this will officially open. They're hoping to have it done July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd before the anniversary, so that is exciting. It is at the Gettysburg Heritage Center on Steinway Avenue. So when it is open, check it out. I'll let you guys know. But this is your Weekend Traveler. This is George signing out. Till next time, folks. Ta-ta.